what should have been the happiest of times was miserable. I was a wreck anxiety wise. It was another decade of having moderate success, gritting my teeth and getting through a situation before events transpired where I was like, oh, I don't just need a tune up in therapy. This is something I'm going to commit to for the foreseeable future.
The world is obsessed with fast track success. It's easy to think that people become successful overnight. But let's face it, more often than not, what we see on social media is total BS. I'm here to look past the perception of perfect success and focus on life's detours, perceived mistakes, and even wrong choices, and understand the real road traveled up the career ladder. After all, we're all effing up. Philip Isle is an award-winning freelance journalist based in his hometown of Providence, Rhode Island. He is the former news editor of the alt-weekly newspaper, the Providence Phoenix. Since the paper's close in 2014, he has contributed to The Atlantic, Men's Health, the Boston Globe, Huffington Post, and the Columbia Journalism Review, among other outlets. He has also taught writing and journalism classes at Brown University, Columbia's University School of the Arts, and the Rhode Island School of Design. He holds an MFA in nonfiction writing from the Columbia University School of the Arts. Philip just recently released his first book, Prescription for Pain. Why were you attracted to the idea of sharing your story on Effing Up?
I think there's a few answers, both personal and professional. As a journalist, biggest story I've told, which is this book that recently came out, is about failures of various kinds. It's about corruption, people acting in the worst ways. It's a dark story about grief and loss and dysfunction. I'm drawn to stories of dysfunction, the darker side of things. And also in another chapter of my professional career, I've written a lot about mental health, anxiety, and depression in a way in which I'm forthcoming about my own struggles with anxiety and depression, various ways of revealing I haven't always been okay. I believe in the importance of telling those stories. I have benefited personally from innumerable podcasts, books, shows where people are talking about real life gritty stuff. I wrote a piece for the Boston Globe about how much stand-up comics helped me in my mental health journey because they are so far ahead of the general conversation
Isn't
around
that
how
interesting? Yeah.
common these things are. I've written a piece for The Week called America's Untenable Happiness Imperative about the pressures in our society to be happy or to appear happy and ways that might be affecting us and how we might navigate that. So as a person, personally and professionally, I'm interested in stories that don't have Disney endings. And I'm interested in always talking to people about the big stuff. I don't love small talk. I don't love surface talk. I like to go deep immediately. I
Yeah.
have this radar for like when people are in therapy or recovery, or I am drawn to those people and I want to talk to those people.
You mentioned your own mental health
Yeah.
and how you've gone to work on that topic. If you think back to your youth, when do you first remember feeling like there was something that needed attention, some investment of time and effort from yourself?
Since being in therapy regularly for the last 5, 6 years and being somebody who has this inquisitive research narrative driven mind, I've gone back to look at what were the first indications that I suffered with anxiety or depression. I remember being a little kid going downtown with my mom to her office on a windy day, afraid I was going to blow away if I got out of the car. I'm like 7 or 8, and I think maybe other little kids would have felt that, or maybe this was little Phil with his already robust capacity for catastrophizing. I would say it really became evident this was affecting my life in college. But even then, and that was via kind of a slow build of some anxiety, claustrophobia, phobias, reaching a bit of a climax when I was studying abroad in Scotland, specifically on a spring break trip to Europe. what should have been the happiest of times was miserable because I was a wreck anxiety wise. I was 21,
Mm.
20, but it was another deck of having moderate success, gritting my teeth and getting through a situation before events transpired where I was like, oh, I don't just need a tune up in therapy. This is something I'm going to commit to for the foreseeable future. That was a turning point.
Sure.
Uh, First glimmer, some serious life turbulence, and getting really serious about taking my mental health.
Mm.
I'm 39, just so people have a frame of reference.
That resonates with me. I had shared on another episode that I didn't realize I was suffering from anxiety in my early 20s. I was like in a really great spot. Work was great, marriage was great, had a lot of friends, was doing the things, but I was having intense chest pain, passing out, and ended up going to the hospital over and over again and seeing a specialist, blah, 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 getting all this testing done and being told, this is anxiety. It's nothing. You're fine otherwise. And I was like, go to hell. You're wrong. I know there's something wrong with me. Just being so angry that they weren't taking my issues seriously. A decade later, going, that's embarrassing. That's exactly what was going on. I see it clearly now. I was in denial. I don't know about you, but I was raised like, you got to tough it out. You got hard problems. You suck it up. You don't talk about it. Just get through it. Don't cry. It was like, be a big girl. I've always been the rock in my friend groups, in my family. Everyone comes to me for advice and shelter and safekeeping. And I'm not saying it's everyone's fault. I did this to myself. I didn't know how to do that for myself. When I started realizing this was all anxiety, I was struggling, I didn't know how to deal with it. What were your teachings as a child in your home in terms of how you deal with problems?
I wouldn't say that in my household growing up, it was explicitly tough it out. There was an unspoken, implicit culture of not looking below the surface. It wasn't a household where therapy was talked about or we processed things together as a group or
Sure.
individually. I have two older brothers. I'm still at age 39. I'm learning how to approach conflict in a way that feels healthy. And I think a lot of what I've learned about the household I grew up in, I've learned in the last 5, 6 years that I've been in therapy, teasing out things that were normal to me, the things that were the air I breathed, the environment I was in. And so if you had asked me what my childhood was like in my 20s or even late 20s, I think my attitude was nothing to see there. I use the word idyllic to describe my childhood. If you look at the street I grew up on, Providence, it is idyllic on the surface.
Every family has their things.
Yeah, so in hindsight, there is, let's just say, much, much more to see than I initially thought.
How about as the years progressed and you started therapy, did you share that with your family and what was the reception?
I don't bring up therapy often.
Interesting.
I don't keep it a secret, but I'm not like, "Hey, let's talk about this." It has come up occasionally, and I won't shy away from it, but it's not something I'm bringing to the table every time. With my
Mm,
brothers, especially in recent years, I've gotten more curious about our upbringing. I have flipped into reporter mode and asked them what they remember and what patterns they noticed. That's been interesting to compare notes. But it's not every time I speak to my brothers, I'm like, oh, let's talk about this time.
sure.
I'd say a shorter answer is for the most part, it feels like a solo project. Not a solo project, but one that I most enthusiastically with friends who are on similar journeys, not
Sure.
people.
That makes sense.
So those are my real fellow travelers, are friends of mine on similar journeys.
When you were a teenager, what thoughts did you have about your future?
I don't think my thoughts about my future were well defined.
Mm,
As late as college, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew what things interested me. There's a distinct moment in my life when my professional future clicked into focus, and that was right after college. when I had a very kind of understimulating corporate job in children's publishing in New York, which I, having been an English major, chose because it related to books, a logical choice. But corporate publishing isn't the best place to go if you love books. About 6 months into that 9 to 5 cubicle job, I was getting really antsy and reading a lot, and I signed up for a night class in creative nonfiction, and that is where the light bulb went off. Journalism, long form nonfiction, writing books of this kind, that's what I want to do. If you had asked me 15, 16 what I wanted to do, I'm not sure what I would have said, even in college.
Sure.
I probably would have said something to do with books and words.
That's not an unpopular answer. It's funny. We expect our youth to figure it out, but well, even still, you ask most adults, they're like, I don't know what I'm going to do with my life, and I'm in my 40s. I think
Yeah,
it's interesting how clearly you've said a couple of times you've identified that there's a personal and there's a professional, which is true. But a lot of people might not delineate the two. There might not be a line between the two because a lot of our worthiness is tied up in our professional, which equals our personal. Can you talk a little bit about that? Why it's one side versus the other in your mind?
I'm 39 years old. I just published a book, and I think of that book as like a grown-up thing, but traditional grown-up things, getting married, buying a house, having kids. I haven't done it those
Mm.
since leaving college. So like almost 20 years, I think I've been much, much more focused on professional stuff. I, I hesitate to even call it professional because I feel very lucky in that I derive a tremendous amount of purpose and meaning from what I do as a writer and as a journalist and as a teacher. I enjoy thinking and talking about it. When I say professional, it's not like I've had a steady income or career in that. It's just, it's been a process of learning where I could maybe make a little bit of money doing this for a certain undetermined period of time. And meanwhile, the other things about if I wanted kids or to get married or where I settle down, that was never a priority. Being in romantic relationships in my 20s and 30s are where I wouldn't say forced to answer those questions, but those questions came up and it was interesting for me to realize, oh, I'm in my late 20s or early 30s and I haven't really thought about whether I want to have kids. Maybe that's because I'm a guy, but also because there was stuff waiting to be discovered from my childhood and that I would untangle in therapy about some of my like unconscious associations with family life.
Mm.
I guess I have a sharp line because I'm aware that I haven't checked a lot of the traditional personal boxes that people check as they proceed into their 30s and 40s, or at least that we are told from certain places.
This reminds me of the Jennifer Aniston conversation that's been had many a times. She's a spinster, no good human because all she's done is her career and nothing
Yeah,
else. Gosh, it's rough to
right.
hear. I'm curious if you have regret
Over what?
over spending time on your career and progressing in that way and not being, as you said, you didn't really think about having kids and all that. Is that something you carry as a burden of regret or
No,
do
not at
you?
all.
Good for you.
No, I guess my values are elsewhere. I'm content with not having kids. I'm with a partner who's on the same page. I don't feel peer pressured. As rocky as my professional road has been, I don't wish I were in a more stable or lucrative career if it meant something far less meaningful or challenging.
Mhm.
Having 9 months in a corporate environment out of college when I didn't know what I do with my career, I think it was like I'm
Torture.
set for life for of knowing on a really deep, bone deep level what it feels like to be like deeply unchallenged
Yeah.
and unfulfilled. So no, I don't have regrets about that stuff. As a journalist, I'm aware of the many environmental factors that make it hard for people my age to buy a house or raise kids. Not that I'm interested in raising kids, but the numbers don't add up. Much harder for people my age, especially in academia or journalism, the fields I've chosen, to have that kind of stability. If you ask me, is there some resentment as to the global factors? Sure, there's some
Oh,
of that,
sure. Yeah.
but not regret on my part.
In regards to the corporate job, did you think perhaps that maybe there is a corporate opportunity that would be better if this and this were adjusted? If I could have this, you just knew. You're like, blanket, nope, one size fits all, not for me. You're shaking your
If
head.
corporations want to pay me to talk at lunch about my book or run writing seminars, yes, I'm down. Call me.
Mm, mm,
But no, I don't think there's any corporate environment that's going to work for me. I almost describe it as an allergy to it, which is
yeah.
a privileged thing to say. Part of my story is that I was, from my background, in a financial position where I could swear off that. There's certainly privilege built into that.
How did that feel being in a job where you knew it wasn't a fit and you didn't know what was next?
It felt deeply uncomfortable when I tossed that whole kind of job career path out the way. For one, like clear and delineated boundaries between work and non-work time have gone out the window. That hasn't
Yeah.
always been great. Part of the reason I like writing and teaching, they do offer individual expression and the ability to be seen and recognized. I think among the many things I was feeling in a corporate job was just like, I wanted to be seen. I believed I had talents and abilities that I wanted to be recognized. And
Yeah.
pretty early on, I also had pretty voracious curiosity that wasn't being met. So it was a lot of discomfort and gave way to like cynicism pretty fast. I'll tell you a funny story. The children's publishing company I worked for, a big red dog appeared in some of the books that they published. And at one point,
Sure.
I don't know, maybe 6 months into my tenure there, I was asked if I would wear the big red dog
No.
suit
No.
there. And I said no. And I was like, chastised for not being a team player. I probably wouldn't have done that even on day one when I had all the energy I could muster. But like that would at that point, being asked to wear the dog suit at some event and like saying no, the writing was on the wall. I recently learned from a friend of mine who I connected with that he wound up wearing the suit.
Oh, no.
Anyway, I don't know if that answers your question, but I was not a team player, or at least a team player of the caliber who would say, yes, put me in the big red dog suit and trot me out at some event.
Why you?
Because I was like the young guy who, if I had been any at all of a go getter with a future aspirations within the company, I would have
That was as
been made fun of.
society.
It would have made sense to get in the suit because I would have.
I didn't go to school to be a professional mascot.
Oh, no offense to mascots, by the way.
No, not at all. Just not what you chose for career.
Exactly. I remember the cliche of looking at the clock, waiting for it to be 5. But at
Yeah.
the same time, I remember my free time being really exciting, and I was reading a lot and exploring New York City
Yeah.
and eager to explore. And so when I did make the connection of how I could have a career in theory that checked the boxes I was looking for, it was really exciting. And things made sense really quickly about what I wanted to do, even if the opportunities might be hard to find.
What other work would you want to talk about in terms of challenges or struggles where maybe you thought something was going to be different than it was, or it wasn't a good fit?
As we're talking about it, I'm realizing that, okay, so the first and very brief chapter of my career was working in a field that wasn't a good fit for me. But everything since has been flipped, where I knew what I wanted to do. I knew what I was good at. I had qualifications to do things, but the opportunities to do that work were harder to come by. And I still haven't found a steady job to fill that. My life since that moment of kind of the epiphany of, oh, this is what I want to do, has been a patchwork of adjunct
Yeah.
teaching jobs at colleges, one full-time stint at a newspaper that closed, the rest of the time being a freelancer, selling stories one at a time. And your employment with a particular publication, it isn't even employment. You're hired to write a story. And when that's over, that relationship is over until you maybe sell them another story. But I've certainly had publications that I've just written one story for. So The challenge ever since learning what I want to do was finding a way to make it work.
To sew the quilt into one giant piece versus having all these patches that you're trying to sew together. Point blank, have you ever had provided health benefits, even benefits that you can pay into by a company?
Not counting the corporate job once at the newspaper that closed for 18 months, but I do remember at some period before it closed, this was 10 years ago now, I think we took a pay cut and maybe that was a benefit cut too.
So let's
I get it.
round 2 of 20 years. That's
Yeah.
brutal. So you've had to find some you've either had to go without benefits and just luck of the draw, let's, take the risk, or find your own health benefits through some third party that you saw somewhere, or maybe you were under your parents for a while because I know New York was more progressive than other states for a while. So until you were 26, you could be on there. That's
It's been
brutal.
Obamacare, the Rhode Island Health Exchange ever since Obamacare passed, so maybe that's 10 years. But
Yeah.
yeah, the perks that come with corporate life, mythic.
Someone in corporate doesn't always realize how much of a perk that is. It's interesting because my career is
Yeah.
in tech. So we're talking about elite, spoiled, super privileged people. And to hear people complain about benefits, always so hard for me to manage. Realize you're getting free benefits and you're still complaining.
I One thing I like about my career is as a freelance writer, everything is potentially grist for writing about. And there's something to your point that speaks to this. So for many years, I was an adjunct at the Rhode Island School of Design, teaching writing, English journalism classes. And that was fine. It was the first place I taught. I have a lot more to say about that. But I didn't have an office. Most adjuncts don't have offices. There was like a little adjunct lounge, this glorified walk-in closet where
Yeah,
there's like a couple computers and you could like maybe print some stuff off before class.
sure.
But that was how it was. Then one semester, acquaintance of mine who worked at Brown up the hill in Providence asked me if I would sub for her for a full semester. And of course, I leapt at that Ivy League, exciting, more. And I had an office that semester. And I wrote an essay about how amazing it was, how moving it was to have an office, how much it meant to me to have an office, and all the different ways that affected the job. When you're talking about things normal folks might take for granted, that for me as an adjunct, having an office was like, ooh, I'm in the big leagues now. And it was a temporary office that I lost.
Right. And I'm like, it wasn't even
I didn't put my art on the walls. It was somebody else's office, but it was an office
it
that
comes
like
with prestige and also a place to hang your hat. How nice.
some price I paid for this career I've pursued, which is a career of passion and fulfillment, is a lot of the things that folks with more stable jobs may take for granted are like foreign,
Yeah.
mythical to me.
So we touched on the psychology of having a piecemeal career, if you will. I'm not trying to be cute, but I realize that maybe comes across as cute. But there's also the instability of income. And I have to
Sure.
imagine that has been challenging as well.
It has. And here's where again I would point to I'm extremely lucky that I have family support and have had some form of family support much my entire career. Which to go back to your earlier questions about marrying, having kids, and buying a house and stuff, that's one reason that hasn't been a priority. Again, I don't want to have kids for other reasons, but even if I did, I think about to do that would probably mean abandoning this career I have. And that's a factor in that equation is, oh, and that would probably lead to resentment, and I wouldn't want to resent my kids. So
Qualifying the fact of the matter is that you haven't made steady income because of the piecemeal design. And
yeah,
regardless of help from family or not, that has to be burdensome at times.
yes, but one of the reasons that I qualified is because I am acutely aware that in journalism and in publishing, these are fields that have a long way to go
Yeah.
to reflect the communities that they serve,
Mhm.
racially, gender-wise,
Of course.
socioeconomically. And because I have the family support and because I'm a white guy, one of the reasons that these things perpetuate, I'm not putting the industry's failures on my back,
No, I
but I am
understand.
saying that certain people can navigate the turbulent waters more easily if they
Of
have
course.
certain resources behind them. And I do.
Okay.
I would certainly think I have a strong work ethic and I have the skills to make it and some savvy that I've developed along the way. But I'd be lying if that were the only reason why I've been able to stick around as a freelance journalist.
I think I'd just say yes and,
Certainly, yes,
right?
and by the way, I have no problem angrily ranting about the conditions in adjunct teaching or media that,
Yeah.
so it's not like I'm just self-flagellating here.
No, I'm appreciative of the fact that you're aware that there are many that are not as privileged and struggle. However, you have struggles too, right?
Yeah,
Like,
and
I'm
and
not trying to compare them by any stretch,
let
but
me
I
just give you
also, yeah,
well, let me just give you an example. So in I think it was 2015 or 2016, I wrote a piece for The Atlantic, their website. That was really exciting for me. The Atlantic is a big
yeah.
brand in the journalism world. The fact that I've contributed to The Atlantic will never come off my resume or bio. I think I got paid maybe 125, $150. It wasn't more than $150. And it was a lengthy piece built on a lot of research. It was about an author from my hometown. And this is not a one-off incident. I
Of
wrote a
course.
number of pieces for Vice, which is no longer really around
Yeah.
journalists, including pieces I put a ton of research and writing into, did a lot of reporting for. Those I tended to get 250, maybe I got $300 for those. These are reported features. I have gotten paid occasionally $1,000 up to $1,000 on rare occasion for maybe a magazine piece. But this is the kind of money we're talking about in freelance
How
journalism.
many hours would you say one of those pieces takes?
Okay, so here's where I say I don't think I ever counted hours because one, that's not how I work, but two, it would be more depressing than it already is to actually. I worked on this book that came out for like over a decade.
Years.
So
Yeah.
to be a freelance journalist or an author, to calculate your hourly rate is like that's an
But
exercise.
if for the audience to have some sort of comparison, I'm just going to say
Okay,
someone consulting might charge $250 an
so
hour. And let's say this piece took 8 hours. Just
the
let's say
Atlantic
that's
piece,
$2,000.
the Atlantic piece that I got paid $150 for, 10 hours, maybe more, maybe less.
Brutal.
I don't think about that because
No, it'll make yourself crazy. I'd like to shift to talk about the book a bit, or rather your time with the book. You just mentioned it took a decade-ish.
yeah,
I am fascinated by the story. A genre that I'm very interested in is drug use. I think just because of like the psychology of like how you start into that and get stuck in that, and do you come out of it or the other?
yeah,
And then to imagine that someone is participating in that activity, we'll say, and then the idea that you got to spend time with this individual and learn this individual, their side of the story, others' side of that story is
yeah.
fascinating. It took a very long time. There was, I know, a lot of ups and downs throughout the process. Talk to me about the labor, the surface. You're an author. You have a book. Oh my gosh, you've gone on a book tour. There might be more in the future. Like, how glamorous, right? Someone might think, what just went off in your head when I was like, how glamorous? You had the smirk.
The other day, I woke up and we have two cats. So when there's puke outside of our bedroom, we never know which cat did it. So I can't. But the other day, I was cleaning cat puke off of a Roku remote. And the thought was in my mind of this is the glamorous author's life. Partly, I was thinking about how what you were saying is in some ways true. There is glamour and excitement.
Sure.
And I don't want to deny those things. There is the fact that there is a physical object with my name on it. And if you take off the cover, it's even etched into the spine of the book. And
Pretty cool.
I can walk into bookstores and they can have it on the shelf. I went into a Barnes and Noble in Rhode Island and my book was next to Britney Spears and Stephen
I saw
King
your
because
post on that. I was like,
like,
oh.
so that's really cool. So there is deep fulfillment and some glamour there. There's also all kinds of other stuff. One thing that comes to mind is it's hard to get people out for a book event.
Yeah.
So I've been lucky to have good attendance, but I also had a bookstore event in Cleveland, the state where the crimes that I wrote about take place, where I say 2.5 people came because it was 3 to start, but one of the people had to leave midway through. So 2 people were there. You certainly wrestle with new kinds of difficult feelings after a book comes out. I
Facts.
didn't let that crush me, but it wasn't fun. I wish more people had turned out. Side note about freelance journalism, it's like all rejection. Acceptance and getting the green light is the norm. Rejection is excuse me, acceptance and getting the green light is the exception. Rejection is the norm. Even more than rejection is like being ignored, and you have to follow up to get the actual rejection. But I was going to pitch a piece, an essay about professional jealousy and how well acquainted one becomes with professional jealousy as a writer when you're working on a project for more than 10 years, and how even crossing the finish line, making it to the winner's circle of completing a book, doesn't assuage your, or at least my professional jealousy. It just changes complexions. An acquaintance of mine, right around the time that my book came out, wrote a book that became a honest to goodness bestseller. And this person was on the Today Show and Barnes and Noble. And it's hard not to peek at the corner of your eye to be like, damn, I wish that was me. Or like Barack Obama comes out with his summer recommended reading list, and some of the people on there are like people you follow on Twitter or kind of know, and you're like, geez, I wish I were on there. The short version is like publishing a book as great as it is doesn't solve all your problems. Doesn't even solve most of your problems.
Something that I wonder is no matter how successful you become, using the word successful is just so hard for me because everyone has their own definition. There's a dictionary definition, but you have your own feelings about that. But when it comes time to the end of our career or closer to retirement, will we ever feel truly successful? I have trouble with this checkbox sort of feeling. And it feels like I read a post by, I think, the lead singer of the Chainsmokers. He's pretty prominent on LinkedIn. And he said something to the effect of, our first album was an amazing success and it was so great. We didn't realize it would be. But now creating that again and having to always go higher, farther, better is like an impossible task. And it's also this obsession with instant gratification we have. We're just always looking for the fix.
Mhm.
Does that resonate at all with you?
Yeah, I will say that one thing I like about being a writer is how tangible it is. There's a lot of gratification and lasting gratification to writing something that's published and that you can always point to. I did that. This thing is out in the world. This exists. But yeah, in other ways, success is, it's really tricky. Word is a complicated word, I think.
It is. Yeah.
Just looking at this book I just published, in many ways, it's been a tremendous success. I've gotten great press coverage. I've gotten great reviews. I've had lovely bookstore events. In other ways, at least on the sales side, it hasn't broken any sales records. And I'm not sure how much money it will yield. And whatever money it yields is certainly minuscule compared to what I put into it. Is it in like raw financial terms, it's almost impossible for it to be a success unless something extraordinary happens, which I hope. But it's just complicated. Success isn't a one dimensional thing for a book. It's multi-dimensional.
Yeah. Talk to me about working with the main character of your book and the struggles you may have encountered.
It definitely was a long and important relationship in the project. If Paul Volkman, and I haven't heard from him since the book came out, wrote me a letter saying how awful he thought the book was and how angry it was, I'm expecting that. That is
I
fine.
would expect that too. I'm actually surprised you have not heard that.
And I let him know that the book was out. If one of the family members of one of the deceased patients wrote me a letter to say how upset they were by the book, that would be a much different thing if I heard that from them. Writing a book about Paul which involved a lengthy journalist subject relationship, spending years writing a book about a guy serving 4 life terms in prison for prescription drug dealing. Easily the longest relationship I've ever had with the subject
Mm,
of something I've written. Our first interviews were in 2009, and
mm.
the last emails we exchanged were in 2021.
Wow.
Not always talking between them, but we did talk a lot between them. I interviewed him in person for over 15 hours before his conviction. We exchanged printed letters when he was in a county jail, and he sent me out pages or more of those. And then we swapped emails when he was in federal prison for many years after as well. It was a complicated relationship, certainly. I can't speak to what he expected. He probably expected me to write the book that he wanted me to write, which is that he's an
100%.
innocent who doesn't deserve to be in prison. And I certainly was very careful never to promise him anything. I said, I'm here as a journalist who's interested to hear more, to learn more about the story, and I would love to hear your side of the story. Fully aware that he might be intrigued by that. The relationship was, it was wild. He wrote one letter from jail in which he said, "Could you be the son I never had?" And I said, "No, I'm not." At other times, he insulted me, called me corrupt, called me brainwashed, called me stupid, et cetera, et cetera.
Did you brace yourself for that rhetoric before it came?
I would say that one of the reasons that the book took as long as it did was I knew, one, that he's a very smart man, two, that he's a very qualified man, three, that he is an exceedingly angry man, and four, that he would probably bring all of those things to bear in attacking whatever I had written. So I wanted it to be, I want to say, bulletproof for legal reasons, but also just for, I wanted to be sure that when I was indicating that he was dishonest or worse, that I had the goods to back that up. In most cases, I was providing the goods in the story itself, and that there were no corners that I cut where he could tear it down. So much of the process was bracing myself because here's a guy who believes that he is innocent of the charges of drug dealing that he was convicted on, that he didn't cause any patient deaths when prosecutors say he caused a number of them, and a jury
Mhm.
agreed that he directly caused 4 deaths. He's a guy who basically his version of the story directly contradicts the one I wrote.
Yeah.
And that's not something I approached lightly. It's not a comfortable place to be as a journalist, but it isn't always about my comfort. I signed it up to tell the story, and turned out to be a hell of a ride to be able to tell it well. It was a wild and complex and unusual relationship. I'll never have one like that again.
What did you lose sleep over during?
Well, there was a whole Freedom of Information Act lawsuit in the middle of the project. And I don't know if I lost sleep, but I was definitely angry, upset, frustrated that I didn't get this information, evidence from his trial, thousands of pages of material that wasn't released to me when I thought it should be. And this
Yeah.
project that I, from pretty early on, envisioned as a book, envisioned as my debut book, was on ice for literally years because of that. So that was frustrating. To write about the death of somebody else's loved one, and more specifically, to write about the traumatic and premature death of somebody's loved one involving a crime, is one of the most sensitive things you can do as a journalist. And in this book, because of the nature of the alleged crimes, there were 13 patients who had lost their lives that the
Mhm.
government was associating this doctor with. So take whatever sensitivity that there was there and multiply that by 13. I wanted to do right by these family members who I reached out to. I tried to speak with all of them, and I wanted to do right by the people who had lost their lives themselves to their memories. So I lost sleep over that. And the whole story was so complicated and so fraught and sensitive that I lost sleep over the whole thing for a long time.
Yeah.
There's a reason my therapist, Deborah, is in the acknowledgments. Look it up. She's in there. I say without you.
She's probably just as invested in the story as you.
Yeah. So, like, again, I'm not saying woe is me. I'm a victim on par with the people. No, but it was not an easy story.
No,
Um,
it's a huge burden to bear to
and it-
tell those stories within the larger
yeah.
story. Curious if you think Volkman sees this as like another notch of success, your book, like he's being written about.
People have said that, and I don't know, but he didn't strike me as the kind of guy who would think like any press is good press. And one of the reasons I know this is because one of the reasons our relationship ended is when I wrote a magazine article about him in 2017, which did not
Mhm.
portray him as the innocent man wrongfully charged and convicted. It was the facts as I saw them, which is a guy who caused a lot of harm. And
Yeah.
I included his perspective in that article as he deserves in any journalistic story for fairness and so people know what he thinks. But the story was given the headline in Cincinnati Magazine, "The Pill Mill Ravaged Portsmouth." And I know that he was deeply unhappy with that article because he told me, he called me a bunch of names and stopped talking to me. So I didn't get the sense that that his ego was tickled by being in the magazine. And so I don't necessarily think he's excited to have a book about him because the title of the book mentions him as the so-called pill mill killer. So I doubt it. Maybe part of his ego is gratified by the attention, but
Mm.
I don't know because I haven't heard from him since the book came out.
Talk to me about the journey to get the book published. What challenges did you face there?
There's a lot of different phases and a lot of different challenges. I didn't know it was a book for the first maybe 2, 3 years, but I had the idea that it would be a book from at least 10 years. So there were challenges abound. One very specific challenge was by the time that I was ready to sell the book in the form of a book proposal, your listeners may not be in the publishing world. They may not know that nonfiction books are sold generally not as full completed manuscripts, but as book proposals, which is kind of like a business plan,
Mhm.
description of the book and a chapter outline and sample chapters and everything a publisher would want to see before deciding whether or not to publish them. So by the time I had a proposal ready to go, what was 2020, I was working with an agent and I, for most of the preceding decade, I'd never really thought that the book wouldn't sell. I always thought I had a good story here, even if I knew that as a debut author, that was an obstacle and didn't have a huge platform, which is one of the buzzwords in publishing. I don't have a million Instagram followers. I don't have a TV show. I'm not a staff writer at the New Yorker. So I knew these were obstacles, but I was pretty confident that I thought the story was so good it would still sell. And for a long time, that turned out not to be the case. I lost track of the exact number, but I think 25 different publishers passed on the book. What I have sometimes described as a campaign of failure that lasted from mid 2020 to early 2021. In early 2021, the agent I was working with said basically, I've taken this as far as it can go, and we parted ways. And so in early 2021, I was agentless. I had a book that had been rejected 2 dozen times, and it looked like I might not actually find a home for this book, which was very hard
Yeah.
to stomach. This is separate from my feelings about self-publishing, which are another conversation. But for this project, for various reasons, I didn't want to self-publish it. Among them, I really don't think without somebody outside of me saying, we believe in this, we're going to take this on, I would have had the ability to get it across the finish line.
Mm.
If I were to dig out some of the emails I sent to prospective agents at that time, which I did and unsuccessfully pitched them, like, "Hey, I just got dumped by my agent and my book's been rejected 2 dozen times, but do you want to work together?" That wasn't fun. That was dark. And what wound up happening was I looked on my shelves basically and found 2 books written by friends of mine for small presses and reached out to a couple presses on my own without an agent, which you can do for smaller presses. And that is how I ultimately wound up securing a deal with Steerforth Press
Wow.
in April of 2021. And Steerforth has been wonderful. I'm so glad I wound up there. It's amazing that
Mm.
given all of that,
What a journey to get there.
they're a small independent press based in New Hampshire. They have a history of publishing quality nonfiction, including true crime. I have a personal relationship with my publisher. They weren't able to pay me the kind of advance that people get from big New York publishing houses, but that was fine. And I'm just so glad I wound up with them. So it did have a happy ending because I wound up being really happy with them, and we published a book together that I'm quite proud of. But yeah, that was tough,
Mm.
among other things in the process.
What else from your life, personal or professional, you feel like you'd want to add that we haven't touched on?
Whenever I get the chance, and particularly in this environment, I'm candid about my mental health journey, especially as a guy. I think that's important.
Mm,
So for 5 years in November, I've been taking antidepressants.
mm.
I was as resistant as anybody to go on antidepressants. I really didn't want to for many reasons, not all of which were good reasons. So just, I wasn't somebody who was like, yeah, sign me up. I'd love to be on them. In a really dark moment in my life and health, I went on them because I was just in a really dark spot. And it turns out that antidepressants have just been wonderful for me.
Mm.
Also, I've been in therapy regularly for 6, 7 years. That's been amazing for me. I'm just totally candid that I'm somebody who has struggled with depression, which at times has knocked me completely on my ass, and I haven't been able to work or socialize for periods of time. I missed a friend's wedding due to mental health struggles. And this has informed why I'm so passionate about writing about mental health, these experiences.
Thank you for sharing so openly. When you look back at your career, what do you pinpoint as a low?
Probably so one low is when the newspaper closed in October 2014, but I was so spread so thin from working at that very same newspaper and so overworked, there was relief there. And this combination, I think, is familiar to a lot of people in journalism, this feeling of fulfillment and purpose, and also being stretched well beyond your capacity and being
Yeah.
undercompensated. Another low point was one I just described of 2021, looking like I wasn't going to be able to sell this project I had dedicated more than 10 years to. In 2017, I experienced a bout of burnout, depression, whatever you want to call it, where I was knocked out for a period of a few weeks, wasn't able to work, which for me, as someone who's admittedly a workaholic, was difficult, that I couldn't just work my way out of it. And so I really didn't know what was going to happen in my life or career. I was really depressed. That was a low point.
Is that when you got on the antidepressant? About
No,
that same.
no, that was later on. That was a couple years later. But I definitely, that moment in 2017 was a moment where I really committed to mental health, taking
Mm.
it more serious. When you ask a journalist in the 21st century about what are their low points, I think a lot of us have a lot of things to choose from. I have seen a number of publications I've written for close. Sometimes I've been there when they closed. I have seen a steady decline in employment possibilities. The job statistics for print or web journalists are really bleak. There's a lot of turbulence out there
Do you feel successful?
in some ways. Yes and no. Financially, no. Professionally, sometimes I have like college friends who are in finance. And I'm always busting their balls. Like my friend Adam was in finance. I'll joke, you made more before lunch today than I made in the last year. And it's a slight exaggeration. So do I feel successful in that way? No. If you were to like tally up the income I've generated, it's be
Yeah.
not a lot. I feel successful in other ways. I have like virtually 100% fulfillment score in my job. None of my work feels like drudgery.
How do you
Like
define success?
I define it in different ways. One is, are you satisfied by what you do? In that case, I'm successful off the charts. Financially, less so. Am I helping people, or at least not harming people? I'd say I have a decent score. I'm not like curing cancer, but I'd like to think my stories are a net positive for the world.
Yeah.
Paul Volckmann, I'm sure, would disagree. Yeah, but satisfaction is a big one. And as I've said, I'm lucky to be in a position where the finances aren't the verdict on whether I can continue to do this work. So in that sense, I feel successful. And there have been moments in the past year where, when your book arrives for the first time, when people send you photos of them or their significant others reading your book, when people send you
Mhm.
photos from bookstores, I saw your book,
That's pretty
when
cool.
you get emails from strangers that they've read your book. Just the other weekend, over the weekend, I was on the last podcast on the left, like a pretty widely followed
Yeah.
true crime podcast. And I got a DM from a local bookstore in Providence. It was like, "You're on the last podcast," all caps. That was awesome. I love that. And I love that
Cool.
I have a relationship with a bookstore that they can text me about it. So there have been a lot of moments where I feel really
That's
successful.
special.
And I was at a local Rhode Island library, the North Kingstown Library, small town recently, and they made flyers for my book event there. I went in, my face is on a flyer. I'm keeping one of those from my scrapbook. I feel like in the ways that matter most to me, I achieved it. But there's still a lot more I want to do.
Yeah, of course. I'm going to ask a few rapid fire questions.
Go for it.
What was your dream job as a young child?
I wanted to be an architect.
What is your path not taken?
Probably being a therapist.
What 3 words would you use to describe your career?
Fun, fulfilling, challenging.
So I like to ask you to label 3 of your jobs with love, ultimate fun, and skip. I don't know if that's appropriate in how your vocations have been designed.
Yeah, we can try. I mean, yeah, you can try. I did love the Providence Phoenix,
Mm,
the paper that closed. It was a complicated love, but I loved it.
sure.
Ultimate
Isn't love
fun.
always complicated?
Yes, it is. Ultimate fun. I'll say Vice. I liked writing for Vice. Yep.
You wouldn't put your book as ultimate fun or love?
Well, the reason I wouldn't put my book as ultimate fun is because it's such a dark, sad, complex story
Mm,
involving real life tragedies. So I hesitate, and I've written about this, to
that makes sense.
be too chipper and cheery and fun about it, because it deserves some amount of some. But if the question was ultimate fulfillment instead of ultimate fun, yes, the book. Being an adjunct at some of the places I've adjuncted, I would skip,
Mm.
because I've literally said, no, I'm not teaching there again.
Thank you so much for being so open. I appreciate it. Congratulations on your book.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Effing Up. I'm your host, Deanne Reinert. If you enjoyed today's episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe on the platform you use to listen to podcasts. Share Effing Up with others, post about it on social media, and/or leave a rating and review. Until next time, count your perceived failures as part of your path to success. After all, we're all effing up.